Hey everyone, we are reading Roswell Pursuit. This is one of the, well, part one of the last two books, this one ends in a cliffhanger. It is the very exciting conclusion of the entire companion book series, which is what happens after the TV series ends. We are going to begin Roswell Pursuit. This is the prologue. Prologue. What has gone before? 1999, September 23rd, Journal Entry 1. I'm Liz Parker, and 5 days ago, I died. After that, things got really weird. Liz Parker was a relatively normal teenage girl working at her parents' alien-themed diner at the Crashdown Cafe. Then came that fateful fall day when a gunman accidentally shot Liz during an argument with another customer. A boy Liz knew from high school, Max Evans, knelt beside her and put his hand over her bullet wound, healing her completely. But when Max ran away and Liz saw a glowing silver handprint on her stomach, she knew she had to find out the truth. Max soon told her the truth, an unbelievable story that would pull Liz and her friends into drama, danger, romance, and an interstellar conflict. Max and his friends were aliens. July 1947. In the desert outside Roswell, New Mexico, an alien spaceship crashed to the ground. The government soon swooped in to quarantine the site, issuing a press release that the wreckage of a flying disc had been reported. Hours later, the press release was rescinded, and the government claimed it was actually a weather balloon. But the government had in its possession, for a short time, material from the crash, including 8 gestation pods. Those pods were later liberated from the government by the 2 aliens who survived the crash. 4 of the pods were placed in a desert cave along with alien technology known as the granolith, and were watched over by the alien who came to call himself Niceto, a Mescalese Indian word meaning visitor. The other 4 pods were taken to New York by the other alien who took human form as Cal Langley. But after Langley got involved in the film industry, he attempted to become more human and left his pod charges to gestate on their own. Niceto watched over the pods in Roswell, but spent much of his time hunting down and killing those who investigated the Roswell crash. In 1989, 3 of the pods broke open and a trio of seemingly human 6-year-old children emerged. Wandering towards the highway, 2 of them were found and adopted by Philip and Diane Evans, and who named them Max and Isabel. The 3rd child was adopted into an abusive foster family and was given the name Michael Guerin. As the children matured, they learned they shared uncanny powers, and the strange memories of their emergence from the pods led them to question their origins. It wasn't until their teen years that they began to discover the larger truth about themselves, and the revelation to Liz Parker of their identities started them on their path. 1999. Max, Isabel, and Michael discovered that they were part of the Royal Four from the warring star system of Antar. There, Max had been King Zan, Isabel had been his sister Valandra, Michael had been his second-in-command Raph, and Ava had been his wife. Ava was the occupant of the 4th pod, but she had been raised separately from the others by Niceto. As a teen, she was reintroduced into their lives as Tess Harding. Max, Isabel, Michael, and Tess were not fully human or fully alien. Their genetic makeup mixed elements of both, giving them special powers. Max could heal others, Isabel could dreamwalk into human minds, Michael could wield destructive or defensive energy, and Ava could mind warp others into seeing or doing what she wanted. They all could manipulate molecular structure to some extent. Following Max's healing of Liz, others soon found out about the existence of the alien-human hybrids among them. Liz's friend Maria DeLuca fell for the bad boy antics of Michael, even though their relationship was rocky. Mutual friend Alex Whitman was attracted to Isabel, though she didn't return his affection. Sheriff Jim Valenti started out as a nemesis to the kids, but soon came to understand that they needed protection more than exposure, especially after Max healed Jim's son, Kyle, preventing his death from a gunshot wound. The Roswell teens would come to learn that they had many enemies. A classified government group known as the Special Unit went to great lengths to capture them, especially after Niceto killed several of his top agents. And other aliens from the Antarian system had come to Earth to kill the Royal Four. Chief among them were the Skins, who could renew their essences using human bodies, which they called husks. Meanwhile, the second set of pods had been opened in New York, and the 4 alien teens there grew up bitter, angry, and tough. After Raph and Valandra, calling herself Lonnie, killed Zan, they brought Ava with them to Roswell in an attempt to broker an interstellar peace using Max as a pawn. Their gambit didn't work, however. Following the death of Macedo, Tess moved up her plan to work a deal with Antarian forces on her own. She manipulated Max into sleeping with her, then became pregnant with his alien child. She also mind-warped Alex into helping her, eventually killing him in the process. When she was exposed as a murderess, Tess used the Granulus to return to Antar to give Max's hair to his enemies. The reasons behind her treachery remained a mystery. Just desperate to recover his child, Max became unpredictable. He tracked down Cal Langley and forced him to help Max. Max tried to return to Antar, but they were unsuccessful. Isabel, rebelling against Max's orders that none of the aliens get further involved with humans, married the man she had been secretly dating, Jesse Ramirez. Michael grew restless under Max's unfocused leadership and attempted to take control of the group himself, and Tess eventually returned Max's child, which had been rejected on Antar since it was fully human. In spring 2002, everything came to a boiling point. The special unit was closing in, gathering evidence against the teens. In an attempt to redeem herself, Tess blew up the nearby military base, but this caused further complications for the group. Max sent his child away so he could live safely with a human family, and the group found itself on the run from Roswell, traveling in a VW microbus. Max, Liz, Isabel, Michael, Maria, and Kyle now travel the country, trying to help others along the way. Max and Liz have finally married, but their happiness is tinged with hardship. They are still pursued by the special unit, the Skins, and other aliens hidden among the human race. Even though they escape Roswell, they cannot escape the forces arrayed against them. Chapter 1. New York City, Tuesday, April 5th, 1994. The storage locker's corrugated metal door had seen better days. When Quinn touched it, it rattled like a chain dragged by a ghost. So you lost your keys again, huh? Rafferty asked, shaking his head as he pulled the pry bar from his tool belt and stuck it into the padlock. The lock gleamed like it was brand new. Quinn wondered how many times the aging, spike-haired punker was going to repeat his little mantra about the keys. Yeah, right, he said tartly. I lost my key again, or the lock seized up. Or maybe I just like watching a manly guy like you forcing doors open. Take your pick. So you gonna open it up or not? Quinn might have broken into the locker himself without any help from the man in charge of the storage facility, but too many uncomfortable questions would have arisen if Rafferty had caught him at it. Rafe held up his free hand as if fending off Quinn's words. Okay. Don't need a load of mouth out of you. Likewise, Quinn said, leaning against the cinder block wall and lighting another unfiltered cigarette. He knew he needed to keep calm. The cachet of drugs and automatic weapons Mr. Conroy had stashed here would set him up for the rest of the decade, if his deal with the Nassar went down by tonight before any of Conroy's other guys realized what Quinn had done. Mr. Conroy sure doesn't need the stuff anymore himself, Quinn thought, hoping nobody would find what was left of his former boss before he fled the country and was safely set up in a beachfront estate on Grand Cayman. Rafferty's close-cropped, dyed blonde hair bristled like the quills of an angry porcupine. You're damn lucky I don't stand on ceremony, kid. I could always decide to enforce the no-key, no-get-in rule, you know? Unimpressed, Quinn blew a cloud of smoke into the other man's face. Yeah, Rafe, and I could always decide to tell the cops about some of the unsavory characters you're in the habit of doing business with. More unsavory than you? Rafferty said, his eyes narrowing. Quinn wondered for a moment whether he was going to raise the pry bar and try to brain him with it. Then, with a sullen scowl, the punker twisted the bar forcefully. The padlock shattered into countless tiny pieces which rained down into the concrete. Good work, Rafe, Quinn said, favoring Rafferty with a lopsided grin as he grabbed the storage locker's door handle. You ought to consider going pro. Rafferty only watched in silence as Quinn pulled upward on the rust and graffiti-covered door. It wouldn't budge. Is there another lock somewhere on this thing? Quinn said after a second unsuccessful try at rolling the door upward. Rafferty swore under his breath and elbowed Quinn aside. The punker pulled upward on the door handle, his far thicker muscles straining against his mustard-splotched t-shirt. The door began slowly rolling upward, shrieking and squealing in protest, all the while until it finally came to a halt, jammed maybe 3 feet off the ground. Quinn made a rude gesture at the stubborn door. He never had this kind of trouble getting it open when he and the guys had stashed the goodies in here for Mr. Conroy. It's almost like something in there doesn't want to be found. The punk yanked again at the door, which remained stubbornly immobile. He stopped and wiped the sweat from his brow. Dunno if I really want to see what you're keeping in here anyway. Then don't look, Quinn said, getting onto his back so he could slide under the partially open door. Though he had anticipated having to crawl into the storage locker, he come prepared with a flashlight, mainly to make sure he didn't overlook anything of value that might have been tucked into one of the storage shed's dark corners. Rafferty started crawling in after him, shining a flashlight of his own into the darkness. This place belongs to me. If you or your bosses turn this space into something out of Silence of the Lambs, then I want to know about it before the cops show up asking questions. Quinn thought about that for a moment. Rafferty usually could be counted on to look the other way when it came to contraband, especially when he knew that said contraband was shortly to disappear from the premises. And Quinn wasn't fool enough to stash Conroy's body here. At this moment, Mr. C's getting up close and personal with the East River's marine life, he thought. Suit yourself, Quinn said aloud. He rose to his feet once he was all the way inside the dark chamber and shined the flashlight around at the heaps of crates and boxes that lined the walls and covered much of the concrete floor. There seemed to be a lot more crates and boxes in there than he remembered. Quinn realized that this might take a lot longer than he'd anticipated. Then with a curse, he understood why. Hey, I don't think all of this stuff's mine, Quinn said. Hastily, he added, Mr. Conroy's. In the cross beams of the two flashlights, Quinn could see that Rafferty hadn't noticed his slip. In fact, the punker now seemed somewhat guilty. Quinn moved closer to Rafferty. The punker might have been bigger, but he was also pretty easy to intimidate. Hey, Rafe, you been doubling up on storage spaces again? I had to move some stuff around just for this week. I was running out of space, and I had some paying customers to please. I gotta make a living too, you know. Maybe you'd like to explain that to Mr. Conroy, Quinn said, enjoying making the punk squirm. Sure, Mr. C was dead, but Rafferty didn't know that yet. Quinn saw Rafferty's eyes go as wide as pizza pans, even in the semi-darkness. Nothing's gone missing, man, I promise. It was just, a temporary move, that's all. I just pushed her stuff farther back into the shed, behind some of those crates from that Langley outfit. Langley? Quinn said, feeling a jolt with dread. Sounds like FBI to me. Rafferty emitted a dismissive chortle. Langley's some Hollywood guy, you dope, actors and musicians and like that. Gotta stop jumping at shadows, Quinn thought, rubbing his jaw. But he considered the stuck metal door. His suspicions rose again. If Rafe really just finished moving all this stuff in here, then why all this trouble getting the damn door open? When he shone his light towards the ceiling, he immediately saw the problem. One of the stacks of crates was piled so high that it interfered with the track into which the shed's upward rolling metal door was supposed to slide. Sticking the flashlight into the pocket of his black leather jacket, Quinn began climbing the stacks of boxes. Rafferty shined his flashlight beam on him as he ascended. Once he reached the top crate, which was maybe 10 feet off the concrete floor, he gave it a good hard shove. It didn't move very far. Hollywood, my ass, he said. He shoved the crate again, harder this time, and it scooted away from him by about a foot. The crate immediately beneath it shifted a little as well. Suddenly, the top two crates were teetering on the edge of the stack. Hey, I didn't tell you to start an avalanche. And Mr. Conroy didn't tell you to fill his space up with stuff that doesn't belong here, Quinn said, and shoved again before jumping clear. The top two crates toppled over and hit the hard concrete with a resounding crash, their heavy wooden lids flying off with the force of the impact. The echoes of the collision almost drowned out Rafferty's no doubt pungent curses as Quinn moved to the now unobstructed door, which he opened fully to let in the daylight. Then he glanced back at one of the two smashed open crates. What the hell? Quinn moved towards the crates, kneeling to peer inside. What he saw reminded him of Mork and Mindy, his favorite sitcom, only this wasn't a giant egg. Mork calling Orson, he whispered. Ava floated blissfully. The entire universe was dark, silent, utterly peaceful. Then came a sensation of falling, an eternally slow tumble followed by a bone-jarring impact, in harsh, all-encompassing light. Using her hands to shield her eyes from the brilliance, she began tentatively to survey her surroundings. She was on her back in a confined space surrounded by gently sloping walls composed of something translucent. A thick, moist, greenish membrane enveloped over her body. Her environment felt comfortable, familiar. But the harsh voices she heard speaking just outside those walls sounded anything but. The language was alien to her ears, yet she somehow was making herself understand it. It was almost as though she was able to glimpse directly into the minds of the speakers. Well, what have we here? Pod people? Said one of the voices. One of the membranous walls was abruptly torn away, allowing more light to dazzle her still sensitive eyes. Squinting against the glare, she saw a pair of faces. Men, one in dark apparel, the other wearing something white and soiled. It's a girl. Can't be more than 10 or 11, and in her birthday suit, too, said the white garbled man. He looked as surprised as Ava felt. He turned and spoke brusquely to the dark-clad man. I thought you said you and your boss didn't do this kind of crime, man. We don't, you dope, said the dark, garbled one. Look at Rafe, she's alive. Well, how the hell she get in here, Quinn? And what's this green glob she's been sleeping in? Looks like something out of Alien. The white-shirted man reached towards the moist membrane that still covered her, then abruptly drew his hand back in revulsion. This is disgusting. Watch it, the other man said, stepping back. You almost splashed that stuff all over me. This leather jacket cost me a bundle. White shirt glared at black leather jacket. How'd she get in here? He repeated. Black leather jacket shrugged, then helped Ava get to her feet. The membrane cover around her began oozing, and she wriggled as it slopped off onto the floor. The white-clad man freed a gray tarp from atop a nearby pallet in boxes, then draped the rough fabric around Ava's naked shoulders. Black leather steadied her, his calloused hands on her shoulders. She shivered, finding his touch repellent. His hands still clamped onto her shoulders, black leather spoke to his companion as though Ava wasn't even present. You're the one's been moving stuff around in here, Rafe. You tell me how she got here, and why was she in that crate? It's God's own mystery, man. I just stash what my customers bring me. It don't pay to ask too many questions about what's in the crates. Know what I mean? The hard floor was cold beneath Ava's feet. She looked around the narrow but high-ceilinged room, a place of poured concrete and concrete blocks with a rolling metal door that was up completely, letting in the full brightness of the mid-morning sun. It's not the son of Antar. I have been brought very far from home. Frustratingly, she could not recall just how this had come to pass, or who might have been responsible. At her feet, amid a tangle of splintered wooden debris, lay a trio of green-tinted translucent pods, identical to the one from which black leather had just freed her. Though they were as yet unopened, she could see that each one contained a small slumbering form, not unlike the strange body she now occupied. Gazing at the three other motionless figures, she felt a stir of memory, though it was confused and sluggish. How long had she been laying doormat, gestating, in that pod? Confused or not, the memory was insistent. The Royal Four, I am one of them, and those three have to be the others. Judging from what's in these crates, Rafe, we got 3 more of these pod kids on our hands, Black Leather Jacket was saying. They sure look human, but how did they? Our hands? No way, man, the other said, interrupting. If your boss is into burying and selling kids, that's his business, but I don't want no part of it. Soiled white shirt man started for the open door. Black Leather suddenly released Ava, and she almost fell. She watched as he stepped quickly into soiled white shirt man's pack, grabbing his shoulder. Where do you think you're going, Rafe? Where do you think, man? To the cops. You want to run blow guns through my place discreetly? That's one thing. You start peddling flesh, that's something else completely. Black Leather's hand moved quickly, and a long knife appeared in it as if by magic. White Shirt's eyes went wide. There was a blur of motion, an arc of splattering crimson. A moment later, Black Leather and Ava were the only 2 people in the little room capable of standing. The other man crumpled to the floor, his legs convulsing as a dark red liquid streamed from his wound and formed a slowly expanding puddle around him. She knew it was White Shirt's lifeblood. She studied the bloody knife, still clutched in his hand as he approached. It was the most dangerous-looking thing she could ever recall ever having seen, either here, wherever here was, or back home on Antar. She could not recall ever having felt so helpless during her former life, or was that somebody else's life? It was hard to be certain of anything except for her need to get away from the man with the knife. Her eyes flipped towards the other 3 pods, still scattered about the floor. She thought of her king and her destiny. Sam must be in one of them. He has to be. Black Leather wiped the knife clean on an edge of the tarp that Ava wore, making her wish she could find her voice and scream. She recalled that she would be able to do something to make this evil creature go away. But she had no idea at the moment how she might go about doing that. Folding and pocketing his knife, Black Leather said, My former associate there made a good point. True, selling kidneys is a little out of my main line of work, but I'm sure I could find a willing buyer for you and your 3 friends. He held up his hands and crooked his fingers, motioning in the air. You could be starring in some special movies real soon. His grin was more of a leer now. Ava started when she heard something moving behind Black Leather. He quickly turned his head towards the sound. The other pods were stirring. The naked forms within struggled against the soft, translucent walls. Blackleather shrugged and knelt beside the nearest pod, which was opening slowly like some strange flower. A blonde-haired girl of about Ava's age was becoming conscious, clawing at the gestational membrane that was her body's only covering. In the pod beside her, a dark-haired boy did the same. Zan, Ava thought when she saw the boy, and Volantra. She knew them instinctively, even though their present forms were so different from the ones she knew. They were younger than Blackleather, their skin unwrinkled and pink rather than gray. Their eyes and heads were a great deal smaller and hairier than their native Antarian forms. Relief and elation swept through her at the sight of them. Maybe their presence was a sign that there was a way out of this situation that wouldn't involve any further bloodshed. In far less time than it had taken Ava, Zan was standing confidently, watching the Blackleather man. Volantra seemed to take a few moments longer to adjust to her surroundings. Zan looked deliberately towards Ava, then spoke in old high Antarian. My knowledge of how the four of us came here is incomplete, but I believe we were released prematurely from these gestational chambers. I need to know why. Her hand shaking, Ava pointed at Blackleather. Ask him. He is the one responsible for that, as well as for the death of that being. She gestured towards the bloody corpse that lay on the floor. Zan looked towards the dead man, then regarded Blackleather with a defiance that Ava could only describe as regal. What do you want of us? Zan said, standing between Blackleather and the two girls. Great, Blackleather said, rolling his bloodshot eyes toward skyward. The knife suddenly returned to his hand, gleaming in the sunlight. Not only was my latest merchandise overnighted in on a flying saucer, but it speaks freaking Klingon, too. Where were you from? Tatooine, France? He wants to take us as slaves, Ava thought. But first he has to frighten us. She could tell from her relentless shivering that Blackleather's tactic was working very well indeed, at least on her. She despised herself for her timidity. Put the knife down, Zan commanded. Blackleather advanced confidently towards the Antarian king. Though Zan now wore the body of an alien child, he didn't flinch. Instead, he crouched slightly, adopting a knees-bent, combat-ready stance. Blackleather laughed, though his knife remained pointed straight at Zan's heart. Please, Ava thought helplessly. Must anyone else die here today? Frantic to find a way out, her eyes lit on the fourth pod, which had lain unnoticed a few feet away during the emergence of Zan and Volantra. The shape that had been slumbering within the farthest pod was gone. This time, Ava tried not to telegraph her reaction. Lower the weapon, Zan said to Blackleather, and raised an admonishing hand. You will not be warned again. Whatever, maybe you just need a little of the universal language, Thug said, slashed at the air near Zan's right ear. The young king continued to stand his ground. So be it, you have made your choice, now you must live with it. Or die with it. Everyone turned towards the new voice, which seemed to be coming from the depths of the storage shed, an area still cloaked in shadows. A moment later, another naked male child emerged into the light. He was blond, appeared to be about the same age as the others, and seemed like Zan to fear nothing. So strange, Ava thought, to see such old souls bound up in the bodies of mere children. The blond boy approached the knife-wielding man without hesitation. Not only did his mien continue to radiate boldness, it seemed to have little room for other emotions, save barely restrained rage. She wondered just how much of Blackleather's violence he had witnessed. The youth smiled at the knife wielder. It was a warrior's grin, and Ava felt a chill when she recognized it. Wrath. He must have slipped out of his pod unnoticed. Hold, General, Zan commanded, addressing Wrath. Wrath continued walking towards Blackleather, halting only a few feet away from him. Okay, this is getting truly weird, said the man with the knife, looking all around him. He had the air of a man who was rapidly losing control of circumstances. How many more of you children of the daylight are hiding out in here? Is this some sort of clubhouse for you naked little freaks, or what? You threaten the person of the king, Wrath said, his eyes focused like lasers upon Blackleather. Stand down, General, Zan told Wrath. I will handle this. Wrath behaved as though he hadn't even heard Zan. Still looking Blackleather in the eye, he said, No one threatens the king or any of the royal four. Not while I live. He raised a hand. No, shouted Zan and Ava in unison. Volantra merely smiled appreciatively at Wrath. She had obviously recognized her predestined mate, despite their strangely altered forms. Blackleather tried to swing his knife arm towards Wrath, to no avail. The man was suddenly frozen like an insect trapped in tree resin. His eyes widened in fear. Wrath made a slashing gesture with his hand, releasing a burst of dazzling light and potent energies. The man flew headfirst into the cinderblock wall, a human projectile. Eva saw the gray and scarlet ruin that had been the knife man's head. She'd wondered if he'd had time to feel pain before the end had come. Raph calmly walked to where black leather lay and helped himself to the dead man's coat. The boy passed a still glowing hand over the garment's collar and lapels, which had been fouled by blood. A moment later, the coat was spotless. Zan wasted no time confronting him. That was not necessary, Raph. I could have disarmed him easily. Raph didn't respond immediately. He seemed preoccupied with the act of helping himself to the dead man's trousers and boots. His hands glowing, he used his innate power to resize the garments. In moments, they were a near-perfect fit for his smaller form. Picking up the dead man's knife, Raph finally looked Zan in the eye. He might have come after you later if you let him live. This creature was too dangerous for mercy. I decide on the Royal Four's actions, Raph. Not you, Zan said. Zan is right, Valandra said, pointing towards the ruined skull of the man Raph had just slain. She sounded disappointed that she'd had to take the king's side in this dispute. If this creature still lived, we might have pulled something useful from out of its mind. An idea occurred to Ava then. Walking carefully around the wreckage of the crates in the open gestation pods, she crossed to the body of the white-garbed man whom the knife wielder had slain. Forcing aside the sick feeling in her butt, she knelt beside the body and touched its still warm forehead. Raph didn't seem to notice what Ava was doing. Forgive me, he said to Valandra in a sneering tone. It didn't occur to me to negotiate with the local wildlife. Ava looked down at her hands. Like Raph, they now glow with raw, unfocused power. We are still but children on this world. It will probably take us some time to master our Antarian gifts again. But she knew there wouldn't be any time for that. They were out of the safety of the gestation pods, ready or not. They were naked and defenseless in a strange place, and they needed help now. As carefully as she could, Ava reached out with her mind, gently probing whatever wisps remained of the dead man's thoughts. It was as though she'd fallen into an erupting volcano. Though his body no longer breathed, his brain, now in the midst of shutting down, was a frantic beehive of activity. She was caught in a whirlpool of memories: school, language, parents, lovers, children, music, history, maths. The onslaught was relentless, a gale-force blizzard of disjointed thought. A brilliant light silently called out to her, tugging at her with an inexplicable gravity. She screamed, suddenly fearful that the dying man was dragging her to her own destruction. Her mind scrambled desperately away from the light, seeking the shelter of darkness. When she came back to herself, Ava was sitting on the floor. Zan, Valandra, and Raph knelt at her side, concern etched across their youthful yet ancient faces. After glancing at the still form of the man whose death had nearly taken her life as well, Ava looked questioningly towards Zan. He shook his head sadly, then spoke in the old, high tongue. I feel that I should be able to, but I can't heal him. I hope his death was not in vain, she replied. Raph scowled. This world is probably filled with death. Best to get used to it by now. What were you able to learn? Zan asked Ava, ignoring Raph's harshness. Willing her chin not to tremble, Ava took Zan's and Valandra's hands. Valandra and Zan also clasped hands with Raph, completing the circle. I think I've absorbed at least one of the main local languages. Let me pass it along to all of you. Ava reached out with her mind. She felt a charge of indescribable energy coursing away from her body, through her friends, and back again. Zan nodded, and the foursome released one another's hands. When he spoke after a long pause, it was in the tongue Ava had heard the two dead men speak. I think we all know this place now, this New York City, as well as any of the locals do. Only then did Ava notice that all four of them were now wearing clothing similar to that of the leather-clad man whom Raph had killed. She glanced inquisitively at Raph, who still wore the slain man's garments. She shrugged and looked embarrassed. Also in this world's native tongue, Valandra said, before you woke up, Raph transmuted that nasty tarp you were wearing into something a little more appropriate for us all, or at least he tried to. Zan examined his own leather and denim ensemble, which Ava thought made him look both dangerous and vaguely ridiculous. He seemed to have forgiven Raph for his earlier indiscretion. I'm not sure how well we're going to fit in here dressed like this. Give me a break, Raph said. A minute ago, I didn't even know I had that power. You were expecting Madison Avenue on my very first try? Ava was impressed at how quickly Raph had picked up some of the local idioms. Ava suddenly remembered an image she had seen in the night man's dying mind. Panic surged through her. Other people are going to be coming here soon. Co-workers, customers. We have to get out of this place now. Zan pointed to the wreckage on the floor. We can't just leave the pods lying here. Someone might trace them back to us. So, Valandra asked, there's so much we don't understand yet about this world, sister. We should take no unnecessary risks. We'll just take the pods along with us, Ava said, knowing how lame that sounded. Zan's approval notwithstanding. After all, the pods were large and heavy, at least in comparison with four small, relatively weak bodies. Raph threw up his hands and glared at Ava. Fine. Where do you propose we drag the pods off to? Can't exactly check into the Waldorf. Ava suddenly felt more of the dead man's memories stirring and moving within the depths of her mind. All at once they came into sharper focus. Turning to Zan, she said, "There's a big storm drain in the back parking lot. It leads down into the sewers. We could drag the pods down there and keep them out of sight." Alondra was horrified. The sewers. It's better than having more of those taking an interest in us, Ava said, pointing at the dead knife man. "If we leave the pods here, that's almost sure to happen." Wrath smiled savagely. Raising a glowing fist, he said, "Bring 'em on." "The sewers?" Alondra repeated. "You can't be serious. The frickin' sewers?" Zan began pushing one of the gestation pods towards the open door. Apparently satisfied that it was far lighter than it appeared, he turned back to face the group. "If others are coming, let's avoid confrontation," he said, to Ava's immense relief. "The sewers it is." Both Alondra and Wrath made sour faces, but didn't argue further. You the man, Zan," Wrath said. Ava found his unpleasant smirk uncomfortably similar to that of the predator he had slain. Bad enough they were encased in unfamiliar human bodies. Were they susceptible to a transfer of personality traits as well? How else is this cursed world going to change us?
Chapter 2, Cheyenne, Wyoming, fall 2002. Mom and Dad, just time to send you a quick email before we get on the road again. Hope all is well with you. I hope business is good at the crash down. I figure you're probably doing okay even without your two best waitresses and cook. Ha ha. It's been so long since I've seen either of you. I miss you both. Someday, maybe it will be safe enough for us to come back for a visit, but right now I think it's still way too dangerous. I can't really talk about where we are or what we've been doing lately, since everyone is scared the bad guys from the government will track us down somehow. Even though all my best friends are here, it's kind of lonely without my family and all the familiar Roswell landmarks. And I've started to realize, well, we all have, how important it was to be safe at home and just how much Sheriff Bellini really was our guardian angel. Speaking of that, please tell him hi for us. Is he still going out with Maria's mom? She's dying to know, but since you guys can't email us back, I guess we won't find out. Max and I are doing well, though sometimes it's still hard to believe we're actually married. We don't get a lot of privacy or anything since we're always traveling with the others. I know that Michael and Maria have talked about marriage too, but Michael's so non-committal. He's gotten a lot more mature over the past few weeks, but Michael is still Michael. And Maria won't commit to someone so non-committal, so there's not much progress there. I feel bad for Isabel since she's away from Jesse. She and Kyle are the only two single members of our group, which doesn't leave Kyle with a lot of choices. And that also means that Isabel's moody a lot of the time. I know I'd be pretty cranky if Max and I were pulled apart the way Iz and Jesse have been. Some of us look a little different now to help us hide out from anyone chasing us. But I can't tell you what we look like, just in case anyone is reading this email other than you. I'll just say that all the guys look as good as Brad Pitt now, and we girls look good enough to get modeling contracts. Ha ha. And if anyone else is reading this email, leave us alone, please. None of us have hurt anyone. We just want to live normal lives. Leave us alone. So anyhow, like last time, I'm only using this email address once, so you won't be able to respond to it, and the men in black won't be able to trace us. I know that sometime in the future we'll be able to talk again, and I hope even see you soon. Faced it. Paused in her typing, Liz Parker looked up. She watched as Maria DeLuca, sitting one stool over from her in the cramped confines of the Cybernet Cafe, composed a hasty electronic note of her own. Liz let herself be hypnotized for a moment by the rhythmically blinking cursor. Then Maria broke the spell by hitting the send button. Maria's email immediately disappeared into cyberspace. You're all done? Liz asked unnecessarily. Maria ran her hand through her newly wavy hair and leaned backward in her chair. Looks that way. There's not much I can really tell Mom. I mean, what am I going to do? Talk about encounters with yet another race of Czechoslovakians and haunted mansions full of skins? She snorted. I bet she's probably wearing a whole necklace full of healing crystals to help with the headache she must have started getting after our departure from Roz. She abruptly caught herself, then glanced quickly around the room as though scanning for spies. From the town, I mean, she finished a beat later. Sitting a few stools away, Kyle Valenti looked up from his computer monitor. His wavy brown hair fell slightly into his angular face as he looked first toward the girl on a point space beyond them. From the way he motioned with his head, Liz could see that something had caught his interest. He mouthed something they couldn't hear, but she lip read two familiar words: Pod Squad. Liz and Maria turned toward the front of the Cybernet Cafe to see their three companions striding in. Max Evans was in the lead, flanked by his sister Isabel and his best friend Michael Guerin. They always look like they're striding off to war when they walk in as a trio, Liz thought. Maybe it comes naturally to them. Of course, Liz was well aware that what was natural for these three seemingly ordinary teenagers was, in fact, rather otherworldly. Their true home was a planet called Antar, part of a solar system that had 5 inhabited planets. Zan had been the ruler of Antar, and his family dynasty had united the 5 worlds. Although Zan was well respected, there were many who felt his policies and agendas reached too far. One of those who opposed King Zan was Kivar, a general who had become an Antarian senator. Kivar spearheaded the conspiracy that overthrew Zan's empire, killing the king, as well as Zan's sister, Valandra, his second in command, Wrath, and his wife, Ava. Sometime during the war followed, the DNA of the Royal Four, the genetic templates for recreating Antar's rightful leaders, was brought to Earth. Here, a faction loyal to King Zan had used a semi-sentient organism called Gandarium to incorporate human DNA into that of the Royal Four. The resulting hybrid embryos were still clones of Zan, Valandra, Wrath, and Ava, except that they appeared to be human. But despite outward appearances, Liz could never overlook the fact that her husband Max, who was heir to the late King Zan's DNA as well as his throne, was not fully human. Neither were Isabel and Michael, who carried in them the genes of Valandra and Wrath. Liz knew she could never escape that knowledge. 4 years ago, Max had healed her after she was accidentally shot at the Crashdown Cafe, which her parents operated in Roswell, New Mexico. On that fateful day, Max's healing touch had transferred some of his alien essence into her. As a result, she now sometimes manifested extra normal powers. Now they were on the run from the government after one too many government investigations into the presence of aliens in Roswell had brought to light a host of unusual occurrences. They had been forced to change their appearances, to use fake names, to travel in a van together, and to be constantly on the watch for potential captors. So maybe they're right to be walking like they're going to war, Liz thought, still watching Max, Isabel, and Michael. And maybe I should be right there with them, with my husband. But in her heart, Liz knew she already was fighting alongside her husband. She and Maria and Kyle were risking their lives every day just by remaining with the group. Are you almost done? Max asked, keeping his voice low. He quickly looked around the cafe to see if anyone was paying attention to them. The plump woman in the floral print muumuu wasn't, nor was the counter helper, who seemed to be playing some kind of game on his computer. Yeah, just sent mine, Maria said, gesturing towards the email program still running on her terminal. Max looked over at Kyle, who grinned and shrugged slightly. I finished quite a while ago, he said, so I've been surfing the free adult sites. How special, Isabel said, her words dripping with sarcasm. Would you hurry up, Liz? Michael said. We can't afford to be on these things any longer than necessary. Liz glared at him and turned back to her screen. She typed quickly, finishing her last sentence. Gotta go. Love you lots, Liz. Then she clicked send. As soon as the system confirmed her message was sent, she hit the quick command extend the program. Liz noticed Isabel pacing behind her. This isn't fair, you know, Isabel said, keeping her voice measured and low. but adding just enough venom to make it clear that she was unhappy. I'm forbidden to talk to Jesse by email or phone, and yet they could talk to their parents. We've talked about this already, Max said. Jesse made it seem like he had made a clean break from you when he went to Boston. If he heard from you regularly, it would put him in danger too. I think it's stupid for any of you to be contacting anyone back in Roswell, Michael said. The parental units can survive without hearing from us for a while. So says the guy who doesn't have any family or friends other than us, Kyle said, half under his breath. Michael immediately shot Kyle a dirty look, but it was Maria who spoke up in Michael's defense. Real nice, Mr. Congeniality. Chalk up some sensitivity points on your Buddha belt for that one. Hey, I said other than us, Kyle protested. I didn't mean anything nasty by it. Liz knew that Max was about to step in as peacekeeper, and sure enough, before Kyle had even finished speaking, Max strode forward, hands up, palms out. Guys, let's cool it. Kyle, are you sure your dad is still keeping that encryption code going? Yeah, I'm sure, Kyle said, clicking down on the clocking bar to open the window. He quickly typed in a URL, and the web page for the Roswell Sheriff's Department opened. Clicking on several submenus brought him to a page labeled Deputy James Valenti, on which a picture of the smiling former head sheriff of Roswell appeared. Placing the mouse pointer over the badge on his father's chest, Kyle said, "See, here's the portal in." He clicked on the secret link and was sent to another page, this one with an error message on it. He added a slash and the name Kyle to the URL on the error page, and another page popped up. This one showed only text, a string of complicated-looking computer code. With his finger, Kyle pointed to the code on the string. Every sixth letter is the code, he said. He's kept it changed every time we send him something. He's making sure to cover his tracks and ours. No one will find us this way. Roswell, New Mexico. A few months earlier, shortly after the incident at the West Roswell High School graduation ceremonies on June 1st, 2002, the members of the federal government secretive special unit had met in a safe house 40 miles southwest of Roswell on the way to the town of Elk. To any member of the public, the clandestine meeting site appeared to be nothing more than a large ranch house whose absentee owners didn't often visit. In actuality, the dwelling had previously been a temporary home for several members of the Witness Protection Program, and the acreage behind the house held more than a few secrets, bodies dating back to 1947. The de facto leaders of the unit, at least those concerned with this particular operation, were the pair who had tried to kill the alien quartet during graduation. Matthew Margolin, codenamed Viceroy, was in his late 50s. His hair gone gray, but his body still strong and whipcord lean. His face bore the scars of past covert missions. He could have had some of them fixed with plastic surgery, but he chose to think of them as a testament to his survival skills. He was alive. His opponents weren't. Margolin's second in command was Dale Bartoli, or at least that was the name he was using these days. Bartoli had the look of a wolverine with fierce, dark eyes, a predatory grin, and slick-back, thinning hair. In his younger days, he had been a Navy SEAL, but he had been recruited for Black Ops wet work during the late 1980s. Margolin often fancied himself as cool and emotionless about his work as it was possible for an operative to be, but even he sometimes visibly got goosebumps in Bartoli's presence. At the meeting, various members of the special unit presented their surveillance files on the Parker, Evans, DeLuca, and Valenti households, as well as on the UFO Center where Max Evans had worked, and the dossier on Max Evans's boss, Brody Davis, the owner of the UFO Center. After a thorough review of the files, the group concluded that the 6 teens who had fled Roswell had likely not had any contact with their families. At least through any conventional methods, all phone lines had been tapped, most of their rooms had been bugged, and every known email address used by any of the families had been trapped with a recursive program. One agent was always on constant surveillance of spy devices. Just in case Margolin thought E.T. tries to phone home. The one fly in the ointment appeared to be Deputy Valenti, the ex-sheriff of the town. Valenti had already made two of the special unit's agents, and he clearly knew that surveillance was still ongoing. And although his house had been easy enough to watch, the Roswell Sheriff Station wasn't quite so easy to bug. Margolin and his agents discussed briefly arranging an accident for Valenti after taking him in to answer a few questions, of course. But the group consensus was that such a course of action was extreme, at least for the moment. After all, none of the parents had made a move to leave town, and although their private conversations and phone calls to one another were often full of expressions of concern for their kids' safety, they never ever discussed the alien aspects of their children. It's almost as if they don't even know, one of the agents had said. But Margolin knew that the evidence just didn't support that. A videotape of Isabel Evans using telekinetic powers had been recovered from the Evans's VCR during an Air Force search, and the search dogs had tracked the smell of alien blood to the Valenti and Evans's homes just prior to the mass destruction of Rogers Air Force Base by the blonde girl they had later identified as Tess Harding, the daughter of a former military consultant who had since gone missing. At minimum, Philip and Diane Evans and Jim Valenti had to know something. But whether they knew the whole truth was a legitimate question. Of them all, Valenti seemed the most likely to know all there was to know about the alien nature of the Roswell teens, as well as the complicity of their friends. Valenti had been involved in far too many strange and unexplained circumstances with various members of the Six, as the fugitive kids were now known, to plead ignorance about them and what they were up to now. He had even lost his job as Roswell sheriff because of a case related to the teens, although he had eventually been rehired as a deputy. If we're going to find them, it will be Valenti who leads us to them, Margolin said to other members of the special unit, most of whom were nodding in agreement. Don't forget, Bartoli said, idly gazing at a gleaming, razor-sharp knife he carried with him since his Navy days. Valenti stands to lose his son if he does lead us to those kids. He's going to take precautions. Margolin nodded. Exactly. So this won't be an easy hunt. Bartoli put the knife away, his grin saying, "Bring it on." This time it was the other agent's shark-like smile that made the hairs on the back of Margolin's neck stand on end. Agent Harrison looked up from the magazine when his computer beeped. He quickly scanned the date on the screen. His storefront office, part of what was ostensibly a realty company, faced the west outer wall of the sheriff's station on East 5th Street. The window overlooked the parking lot, enabling him to keep track of Valenti's departures and arrivals. The signals from the few bugs and traps they had managed to set up inside the sheriff's station were strong enough to be received here. The programs the special unit was using were beyond cutting edge. They had been developed by a few of the top hackers in the country, each working independently, each hoping that the help they gave the federal government's Office of Total Information Awareness, TIA, would mean leniency for whatever computer crimes they had committed. The task was made easier in the post-September 11th world. Even hackers were patriots if they thought they could stop terrorists. And while the programs they developed were already in use for the tracking of human-made terrorist threats, the special unit was free to deploy the very same technology in its ongoing effort to trap the aliens who lived among an unsuspecting populace. Today, the TIA surveillance programs were working very well indeed. Quickly, Harrison punched a phone button that gave him a direct line to Director Margolin. Simultaneously, he brought up the file he'd need to send and began scanning all the relevant numbers and map coordinates. Yes, came the voice on the other end of the line. Sir, I've got them with the encryption trap. They've just transmitted 3 emails from a site in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Good. Alert the FBI field office immediately, Margolin said. Already on it, Harrison said. Updated copies of the fugitives' files, which contained photos of the 16s, went to the FBI field office, as well as to both the state and city police departments. Harrison included an email message. To all departments, suspects in terror plot spotted at Cybernet Cafe establishment, 2376 Cypress Avenue at 1400 hours. Suspects are armed and dangerous, but must be subdued. No lethal force. Use bags, tranks, or tasers. Do not interrogate. Press blackout. Call 888-555-2938 with confirmation of capture. Sent, sir, Harrison said. Send me copies of the 3 emails as soon as you can. Right away, Harrison said, scrambling to do just that. Let's hope we catch them this time, Margolin said. Good work, Harrison. The young agent grinned. He hadn't been a part of the special unit for very long. This would look very good in his files. He began to read the emails he had trapped. Deputy Valenti will never know they've been intercepted. Cheyenne, Wyoming. Sitting in the cafe between Maria and Isabel, Liz watched Kyle and Michael and wondered if any 2 people could be more different. Kyle sat behind a computer terminal, a model of Zen Calm. Like the Buddha, she thought, if he'd ever tried to find nirvana by surfing naughty websites. Michael, however, didn't appear capable of sitting as far as Liz could see. He was pacing like a caged tiger. They're going to intercept those emails, he said, just like they probably bugged the phones. Maybe, said Max, who was leaning in a nearby corner, evidently trying to stay out of Michael's way. Maybe not. Liz spoke up, hoping to reassure both Max and Michael. There's no way they can do that. Deputy Valenti took plenty of precautions. Besides, I'm pretty sure it's impossible to tap and trace email messages anyway. Max didn't look too sure about that, and Michael appeared utterly unconvinced. A lot of people think aliens are impossible, too, Michael said quietly. Relax, Michael, Kyle said, grinning as Michael moved toward the door, looking suspiciously across the quiet open-air mall outside for perhaps the 100th time. We're safe as houses here. You know, I never understood that expression, Michael said. Houses blow apart when it gets windy enough outside. We need to get out of here soon. Looking up at the digital clock over the door, he added, it's 2:02. You guys have 5 minutes to wrap this up and sell the check. Max and I are going to get some snacks for the road over the taqueria. We're almost completely out of Tabasco sauce. Who died and made him king? Maria said sullenly as Max and Michael departed the cafe and went outside into the mall courtyard. Liz gave her friend a look, cocking an eyebrow. He's your boyfriend. You should be able to tame the wild beast. Oh, we've all had so much time for beast taming, living in the back of the van together and driving across the scenic wilds of the Southwest, Maria said. I bet Max will start getting just as cranky as Michael if the 2 of you keep getting as little quality time together as Michael and I get. Isabel made a pained face and put her hands up, palms out. Ew, okay, I don't need to hear about it. I haven't even seen my husband for 4 months, so your problems seem minimal compared with mine. I don't want to hear about it either, Kyle said with a mischievous grin. Why do you think I'm surfing the adult sites? Isabel smacked him in the back of the head as she walked past. Come on, guys, let's pay up and get out of here. Maria turned back to her computer and her mouth shaped in an O of surprise. Whoops, forgot to log off. Liz gave her a scolding glance as Maria clicked around on her terminal, exited the email program, then erased temporary files, cache memory, and history from the machine. You girls go ahead. I've got 3 more minutes on my card, Kyle said. He turned back to the computer. Liz joined Isabel up at the counter where she noticed that Max's sister had put on her flirty face. She smiled engagingly at the male clerk and said, "Hi," in a sing-song voice. "How much do my friends owe for their time on the computers?" The clerk, a skinny, bespectacled computer geek type who appeared to be in his late teens, blushed and stammered slightly. $6 each." Isabel fished in her small pocketbook, pulling out two $20 bills. "We need some ones. Would you mind changing this for me?" The clerk took the 2 bills and punched numbers into the cash register. He looked up at Isabel. "Anyone ever tell you that you look like Laura Croft?" "Only when I wear my hair like this," Isabel said, running her hand under the long French braid into what she'd fashioned her newly darkened hair. "Thanks for noticing." She flashed him a toothy smile. Liz turned away, rolling her eyes as the clerk counted out change for Isabel. She looked toward the front of the store where Maria was standing and looking outside. Maria turned quickly toward Liz, who saw the alarm on her friend's face immediately. "Liz, we've got trouble." Liz rushed over toward the window. Kyle got to his feet and moved forward as well. Maria pointed down to the lower level of the mall, which lay beyond the balcony. There, Liz saw several men dressed in dark suits, as well as several police officers and security guards moving quickly through the crowd of afternoon shoppers. "Oh no," Liz said under her breath. She looked down the balcony toward the coffee shop and saw Max and Michael waiting in line, oblivious to looming danger. 3 stores down, the wall opened up, making way for an escalator. "An up escalator," Liz observed. As Isabel came towards the group, Liz said, "We've got to get out of here, and we have to warn Max." Then Liz saw a mixed quartet of federal agents and cops coming down the balcony, heading directly towards the Cybernet Cafe. All of them had already drawn their guns. Liz turned quickly and looked toward the rear of the cafe, searching for a rear exit that wasn't immediately apparent. Her heart lay leaden in her chest. "We're trapped."
Chapter 3, New York City, fall 2002. Yet another bullet winged near Raph, singeing his spiky mohawk haircut as it passed just an inch or so from his partially shaved skull. The shell's impact sprayed plaster dust through the darkness, making him cough. He dove for cover behind a tall metal rack that was covered with discarded boxes, the mortal remains of automotive parts or plumbing fixtures or whatever this abandoned warehouse had trafficked in during better days. He knew the flimsy, collapsing shelves and old packages wouldn't provide much protection against the heat those freaks were packing. He couldn't see them, but he knew they were closing in. "Come on, Lonnie," he thought, using the name Valandra had chosen on Earth. "Find the gadget that brought them to Earth, blow it up, and let's all get the hell out of here." Raph wanted nothing more than to hit the nearest exit, assuming he could find it with the lights off, and run like a rat for the safety of the Manhattan sewers. But if the information Lonnie had given him after her last dream walk could be trusted, then they were in the right place. "If we can just find the right thing to blow up," he thought, "then we can send these bastards back to wherever they came from." He wondered how the freaks had found and cornered them so quickly. Surely they hadn't traced Lonnie's dream walk. As far as he knew, nobody had ever done that before. Ava had to be the one at fault, he realized. She had never been as good at covering her sonic tracks as Lonnie was. And although Ava had a real knack for reaching inside individual minds and nudging them into seeing the world her way, she had always had a tough time handling larger hostile groups. On top of that, Raph couldn't help but wonder whether Ava was still on the same side as he and Lonnie. Ever since Lonnie and I tossed Zan in front of that truck, Ava's been harder and harder to keep in line, he thought. Letting her get close to that Evans guy, that other Zan, was a huge mistake. Perhaps letting her come back to them months later had been his real mistake. A moment later, Raph found Ava nearly tripping over her in the darkness. In the brief illumination of a muzzle flash, he saw her crouching behind one of the metal storage racks, her usually immaculate platinum and blue hair now thoroughly mussed and covered with a dusting of white plaster debris from the nearby bullet impacts. Raph snarled at her. "How fabulous is this? You led them straight to us." He felt plaster dust against his skin as she shook her head. "Evil Emperor Zerg's minions are doing their damnedest to blow us away, and you're blaming me for it?" You must have set off an alarm when you brainwiped those guards outside, he said, crouching close to the floor himself. Fortunately, the sun hadn't yet risen, and darkness had always been his friend. But Raph knew they wouldn't stand a chance of escaping if they were still pinned down inside this warehouse after daybreak. No way, Lonnie must have set us up, Ava hissed. Raph didn't want to think about that. After all, Lonnie was his lover as well as his accomplice in Zan's murder. He and Lonnie had no choice but to trust each other. Ava, though, had spent enough time away from both Raph and Lonnie over the past year to place her loyalties in doubt. You're a walking bullseye, Queenie, Raph said, his jaw set into a hard line. These bums must have locked on to your latest Jedi mind trick somehow. Whether she'd intended to or not, Raph was certain that Ava had gotten the three of them into a lot of trouble, maybe more than even they could handle. Another bullet chewed up the wall immediately behind Raph and Ava, coming even more uncomfortably close than any of the others. These bums are about to blow great big holes through us, Raph man, Ava said. Think we could bookmark this argument for later? Raph had to admit that she had a point. Their attackers, of course, were anything but bums. There were any number of warring political factions back home on Antar, many of whom temporarily occupied the bodies of Earth humans in order to parlay on neutral ground with their adversaries. Some of these Antarians liked to take over the bodies of derelicts or street criminals. People who, like the East Coast Royal Three, weren't likely to be missed by the locals. A few of these individuals had little reason to surrender their now heavily armed host bodies to their original owners, and even less restraint about placing those bodies at risk. Strange how these freaks didn't start coming after us until after Ava came back from the desert. She found a whole new kind of trouble out there and let it follow her home like a bunch of stray cats. At the moment, Raph guessed that at least a dozen alien-possessed street folk had been cornered. Been through worse, he told himself, though at the moment he was hard-pressed to recall just when that was. Through the darkness, concealed him from the freak's seat, also prevented him from finding a specific target onto which he could focus his powers. My zappers work way better as a rifle than a shotgun, he thought, and those bastards out there know it. He clenched a fist in frustration and began glowing a dull red. They want me to fire blind. They want to tire me out. Another bullet tore through the drywall nearby, only nearly missing his glowing fist. He shoved his hand into a vest pocket as he pulled Ava along with him. They had to keep moving. If anybody's a walking bullseye around here, Raph, it's you, Ava said, looking at his hand, whose glow was still slightly visible, even through his leather vest. Shut up, Raph said, though he knew she was right. He continued hustling her along, hoping they'd come upon a door or a window soon. You seen Lonnie? Ava laughed bitterly. Let's hope she's not cutting a deal of her own right now with those nice people shooting at us. It's happened before, you know. A familiar voice cut through the intermittent staccato of gunfire. All right, hold your fire. I'm going to give you what you want. Raph recognized the voice immediately, despite the creepy echo that the huge darkened warehouse imparted to it. Lonnie. I knew it, Ava whispered. She's going to sell us out to the freaks. Shut it, Raph said. Lonnie has a plan. Come on out where we can see you, Valandra, came the response, a harsh, gravel-coated voice, speaking in perfectly inflected high Antarian. You can't hope to stand against us all. Raph saw shadowy forms moving ahead of him. He wondered if dawn was already breaking, or maybe his eyes were simply adapting to the darkness. With no way to tell the exact time, he hoped for the latter. Then another shape began to move. It was bathed in the faint glow that the freak surely had to be able to see. Lonnie. At that moment, Lonnie spoke inside his mind, using the lover's bond they shared as a communication channel. Raph, can you hear me? Raph scowled. His incremental voice was faint, as though something was interfering with their thoughtcast. What's wrong, Lonnie? I haven't heard anything blow up yet, and our friends are still here and hostile. They protected their machines from our power somehow, Lonnie thought to him. Raph felt despair engulf him, threatening to drown him like that time the riptide had nearly killed him off the Jersey shore. Great, Lonnie. Can't blow up their machine. We can't send these guys back to whatever planet they came from, and they're going to kill us. No, Lonnie thought back at him. He felt an almost playful undercurrent in her sonic voice. I found a boiler room in the basement. They've got an oil furnace down there. Those guys didn't bother to protect that. It might take a few minutes, but we're going to go boom really soon. Raph grinned, imagining valves being turned and flash-wielded temperatures cranking up and up, fuel tanks igniting. That's my girl, he thought. Mass destruction and fireworks, the old-fashioned way. Buy some time, Raph. I can't see them with my eyes yet, but I can feel them moving towards me. Lonnie came to a stop a short distance away, her body still glowing with focused, barely contained power. Raph could hear weapons cocking in the darkness, instruments sounding metallic noises that echoed back and forth across the cavernous space. I can give you Raph and Ava, Lonnie said aloud, her voice projecting far and wide, but not if you shoot me. I knew it, Ava muttered. crouched besides Wrath, behind one of the shelving racks, she started to rise. Wrath restrained her with a hand on the shoulder. No, we wait. Ava tensed, forming a sonic connection of her own with Wrath, just as she had done with him also many years before, after the royal four had first emerged from the gestation pods. All at once, Wrath could see in Ava's mind, as well as the images Lonnie was sending him. Wrath felt as if he was suddenly floating invisibly near the warehouse's high ceiling, and from this vantage, he could mentally see each of the armed men and women, all of them apparently malnourished drug addicts or other sordid street people who had surrounded them. Touch Ava, Lonnie said inside Wrath's mind. Let her see what I'm showing you. Already done, sweet cheeks, Wrath answered silently, grinning in the darkness. There were exactly 14 of the freaks, and as of this moment, he knew exactly where they were standing. He knew that Ava did as well. To Ava, he thought, how many freakazoid brains can you fry at once? Answering inside his mind, Ava seemed ashamed of her earlier distrust of Lonnie. I guess we're about to find out, General. Through the hand he placed on Ava's shoulder, Wrath felt her body tense as the alien power gathered and built within her. So do I have a ceasefire or what? Lonnie said, speaking to the darkness, where the armed street people stood in tense silence. The rough-voiced man who had called out to her earlier answered, Your queen is trying to pierce our mental defenses. Given that, it seems a truce would be a spectacularly bad idea. Oh, crap, Ava thought to Wrath. Their machines aren't the only things they built shields around. Thanks to Lonnie, Wrath could see the man in the dark as he strode forward and raised his weapon in Lonnie's direction. Wrath released his grip on Ava's shoulder and felt the three-way thought link collapse. Now the universe contained only himself, Lonnie, and the freak who was trying to kill her. Swept along on a wave of fear and rage, Wrath lifted his hands. The power surged and churned within him for a split second before he released it. The gravel-voiced man with the gun blew apart into countless pieces. Move! Wrath shouted at Ava, already on the run. He could hear a fusillade of gunfire as it tore up the space where he had been moments before. Wrath looked towards Lonnie, who still stood in the center of it all, glowing in fury, her arms extended like those of an angry goddess. By some miracle, none of the freaks had managed to shoot her. Then he saw how her image wavered and rippled like a mirage they'd seen a couple of years back after they'd stolen that yuppie's car and headed out to Roswell. Shields up, he thought, suddenly realizing that his lover could do a pretty convincing impression of her dead brother's powers. The first rays of the sun were slicing through the skylights, and Wrath saw Ava dive for cover as a pair of armed thugs, strung-out junkies from the look of them, all bone and bristle, chased her. He raised his hands and released twin flashes of energy, pushing the two men swiftly backward and impaling them both on a nearby metal rack. Ava looked horrified. We don't have to kill them, Wrath. They're possessed. They're not responsible. But Wrath knew he didn't have time to make distinctions between the hostile aliens and their innocent hosts. These bodies were carrying lethal weapons aimed at him and the girls. Let the old gods of Antar sort them out, Wrath said as a red haze swept across his vision while he and Lonnie went to work in earnest. Wrath wasn't certain how long the battle lasted. Time seemed simultaneously to speed up and slow down during the fighting. He realized it hadn't gone quickly when he noticed the bright daylight streaming in through the broken windows. He looked straight up and saw the bright cerulean blue that lay beyond the shattered skylights. He surveyed the now well-illuminated room, which was strewn with upended shelves, wrecked masonry, and lifeless bodies. He saw Ava standing in goggle-eyed silence. Only then did he realize that his powers felt spent and that he was holding a blood-spattered metal bar. An equally gruesome body lay at his feet. In an oddly debris-free spot near the center of the warehouse, Lonnie sat on the floor, looking as dazed and exhausted as he felt. Wrath suddenly realized that he was looking at what could only be described as ground zero of the battle they had just fought. She's not used to going up against a whole homeless infantry battalion, he thought, running towards Lonnie. None of us is. Looks like they're all dead or fled, Wrath said gently as he helped her to her feet. He realized that Ava was now beside him as well, concern etched across her pretty but careworn face. Come on, he said to them both. We've got to get out of here before more of them show up. We're all way too late to deal if that happens. Lonnie nodded, then stumbled. Wrath and Ava both fought her. Finally, regaining her footing, Lonnie turned and looked straight at Wrath. As always, her eyes were deep and beautiful, and very frightened, he realized. It's too late, she said. I can feel more of them coming in the back way. They're almost on top of us already. Wrath, hearing angry shouting behind him, turned toward the sound. At least another dozen street people, several of them drawing guns, were heading towards them at a flat-out run. Fiction, Wrath said, already pushing Lonnie toward cover as Ava followed. Let's go. He glanced towards Ava, who had placed a hand against her temple and closed her eyes. Tell them to take a number. We've got more company. Who? Rat asked. At that moment, a large window pane over their heads shattered as two metal canisters arched into the warehouse on trails of thick black smoke that swiftly began filling the room. New York's finest, said Ava. Great. Just great, Rat thought. As his chest tightened and a painful coughing fit seized him.
Chapter 4. Cheyenne, Wyoming. In simpler times, Kyle Valenti had the high school hero mantle practically bestowed upon him. He had excelled in football and other sports and had a smart and pretty girlfriend in Liz Parker. If he ever got into typical teenage trouble, the worst he could expect from his father, the town sheriff, was to be grounded. And then one day it crashed and Kyle's world began to crumble around him. Soon, not only was Liz infatuated with Max, but so, in a manner of speaking, was Kyle's father. Sheriff Valenti suspected something of Max and his friends, but he didn't really articulate his suspicions to his son. In fact, his bond with his son grew more and more strained with each passing day. Kyle grew to resent Max Evans, so it's quite a surprise that Max ended up saving Kyle's life. Agent Pierce, a thug for some secret government agency, had exchanged gunfire with Sheriff Valenti at the UFO Museum. During the brief gun battle, Kyle was accidentally hit by a bullet fired by his own father. Even now, Kyle would sometimes wake up at night feeling the bullet tear into his flesh, penetrating skin and bone and muscle, his mouth filled with a pungent metallic taste. Kyle remembered the darkness in the museum creeping inexorably towards him, but Max's approach banished the encroaching darkness. He had laid his glowing, silver-palmed hand on Kyle's wound, healing him instantly. Since that time, Kyle had joined Liz and Maria among the ranks of the I Know an Alien Club, and subsequently had been caught up in many of the misadventures and tribulations the half-extraterrestrial teens faced. Interestingly enough, the shared knowledge of the aliens among them had brought Kyle and his father closer together. Kyle sometimes thought it was actually his momentary brush with mortality that had done the trick, but he knew better. His dad had been obsessed with aliens and UFOs for as long as Kyle could remember. It was an obsession he had inherited from his father. Now they were among the few people alive who knew the real truth of the matter. After his resurrection at the hands of Max, Kyle had found Buddhism and had learned mostly to find a more centered space in the universe. He had found that the Buddha's Four Noble Truths were tremendously apt for him as well as for his alien friends. Life means suffering. Suffering has a cause. The cause of our suffering can be ended, and suffering can be ended by following a path to wisdom, peace, meditation, and growth. But it was hard for Kyle to stay centered when the cause of the suffering in the last few months had been fear of capture by the government. Indeed, at times it seemed as though the best path to end the cause of his suffering was to fight back. But the noble eightfold path pushed him toward peace and taught him not to bring harm to others. On the other hand, the tenets of the path also talked about not lying or stealing. And he and the others had done their share of both lately in the interest of survival. Since leaving Roswell, he'd again been healed by Max. And Kyle now wondered if these healings weren't bringing about some form of transformation within him. During his late night meditations, when the others were usually asleep, another thought kept creeping unbidden into the Zen garden he strove to make of his mind. Have I been made into something other than what I was before all this started? Am I now part alien like Liz? And if that's what happened, then what will my purpose be? Today, Kyle had little time for such internal debates. He stood in the Cybernet Cafe at an open-air mall in Cheyenne, Wyoming, teetering on the brink of more potential suffering and confrontation. Coming toward him and his friends from the front of the cafe were government agents and police. More cops and government spooks were also likely closing in from other directions, including, no doubt, the section of the mall toward which Max and Michael had just headed moments ago. Kyle whirled and looked toward the back of the room. He saw a payphone and a restroom sign, but no door. There's got to be an exit back there, he reassured himself. He turned to Maria, who stood saucer-eyed as the cops and feds continued their approach. Liz was looking toward the back of the shop. Find the back door, Kyle said, surprised at how firm his voice sounded. I'm guessing from the layout of this place that it leads to a service corridor. Already on it, Liz said. Let's go. Kyle shook his head. You three go. I'm heading out the front to try to warn Max and Michael. Liz opened her mouth to argue, but Maria yanked her by the arm and pulled her to the back of the cafe. As Kyle opened the glass door to exit out the front, he saw Isabel touching the adjacent windows and doors. Immediately, they changed color, an inky black spreading like a viscous liquid across the clear panes. Camouflage, Kyle thought. Smart thinking. Sure, it would likely draw attention, but so would the onrushing peace officers. He knew Isabel probably would have fused the door locks before exiting through the same back way that Liz and Maria were taking. He also knew he didn't have long to think about it. Their pursuers were already less than 20 yards away and closing fast. Spotting his opportunity, Kyle moved across the balcony aisle and grappled with a giant garbage can there. It was one of the round concrete types with a metal container nestled inside it. There was no way he could pick it up, but he could tip it over and roll it. As he strained to topple the trash bin, he saw that the police had closed their distance by half. He concentrated so thoroughly on his task that they seemed to be moving in slow motion. He could hear them yelling to him, but he blocked them out as he might have done with any small distraction during his meditations. They might as well have been speaking a foreign language. With the final shove, he sent the garbage rolling straight at the cops. Before it could even reach them, he sprinted towards the food court. He caught sight of Max and Michael across the courtyard and saw that they finally seemed to have noticed what was going on. As they raced away from the taqueria and towards the cafe, Kyle saw still more pursuers coming up one of the escalators and pointed towards them to alert Max and Michael. But it may already have been too late. Two agents and a cop had their guns drawn, and they pointed them straight at the young pair, yelling for them to get down on the ground. Max and Michael put their hands forward, palms out, fingers flexed, and Kyle saw a familiar glow of energy. Kyle knew that for them to use their powers this publicly, they had to be as panicked as he was. A wave of power thrust forward from within both of them, blasting their attackers over the side railing and onto the mall's lower level. Flailing, two of their pursuers landed in a decorative fountain. The remaining one wasn't so lucky, instead hitting a plastic bench which shattered on impact. Kyle ran towards Max and Michael. Where's Liz? Max asked, his eyes wild. I'm pretty sure they all got out into the service corridor through the back of the cafe, Kyle said, keeping his voice low. Michael used his powers to blow another pair of government men off their feet, sending them crashing back onto the escalator. They better have gotten out. You should have stayed with them. Somebody had to get out here and warn you, Kyle said. Amidst the screaming from terrified mall patrons, an amplified voice echoed from the halls. Drop your weapons and put your hands up. Kyle saw agents trying to get the door to the Cybernet Cafe open, but they were cautious because of the blackened glass. They had no way of knowing what might await them inside. Max grinned, looking almost malicious. What'll it be? Hands up or weapons down? He asked. Can't do both. Kyle grinned at Max, whose hands were his weapons. Pointing towards the nearby trendy clothing store, Max said, in there. The front of the establishment was all windows with fancily dressed mannequins aplenty set in various poses. The three fugitives ducked into the store, even as clerks and customers dove for cover, some whimpering in fear. Everybody keep your heads down, Max yelled. We won't hurt you, but the guys chasing us just might. Hiding behind a rack of overpriced sweatshirts, Kyle saw that the police and government agents now stood just outside the clothing store. All the bystanders were out of sight. Though the cops seemed to be debating strategy, Kyle was willing to bet that they couldn't be prepared for what was coming next. Standing behind the clothing rack near Kyle, Max and Michael put their shoulders together, extended their arms and hands, and unleashed a powerful wave of force. The glass windows at the front of the store exploded, and mannequins, sweaters, pants, and platform boots went flying outward. Kyle breathed a quiet sigh of relief that the explosive wave only hit their pursuers. None of the customers in the store appeared to have been hurt. "Let's go," Max said, turning. Kyle could see that sweat had beaded on his friend's forehead. Kyle followed him and Michael toward the employee stock room in the back of the store, praying it would lead to the same service quarter where Liz, Maria, and Isabel were supposed to have headed. "Which way?" Maria asked, her voice a plaintive wail. Liz looked down the hall in both directions, then came to a decision. "That way," she said, pointing to her left. "There's an exit sign." Liz was relieved to see Isabel finally come scooting out of the doorway right behind her and Maria. "Did Kyle make it to Max and Michael?" Liz asked Isabel, feeling a tight knot of fear slowly expanding in her belly. "I don't know," Isabel said. "By the time I was through making my barricade, I couldn't see out any better than the bad guys could see in." "We got to get to the van either way," Maria said, pulling Liz's arm, "if it isn't already surrounded by MIBs. The three girls had run about 50 feet down the corridor, their footfalls echoing like gunshots, when a pair of side doors opened almost immediately in front of them. Two burly agents in dark suits entered the corridor and rushed them. Liz heard a sharp crackle of electricity as the trio collided with the agents. Then saw Maria and Isabel falling to the floor like marionettes with their strings cut. Liz jumped over the body of Maria as it fell, staying just out of the reach of the agent who carried the taser. As the other man knelt to check on the two fallen girls, the taser-toting agent continued to advance on Liz. "Get down on the ground," he yelled, pulling his gun with his free hand for emphasis. Liz's mind whirled. She could run, but he might shoot her. And if he does, what if Max doesn't manage to save me this time? For all she knew, all the others might have already been captured, or worse. "Get down on the ground," he yelled again, his gun now leveled directly at her. Slowly, as if in a dream state, Liz Parker began to kneel on the cold, unyielding concrete floor. Isabel moved languidly on the silken sheets, extracting her limbs and stretching. No, not Isabel, Valandra. Her long, tapered gray fingers were exquisitely formed, fit for royalty, fit for worship. A pleasant-smelling wind blew in from over the black vastness of the sea, and the room was faintly illuminated by the glow of tiki orbs, as well as from the trio of moons that were set like jewels into the dark, cloud-strewn sky. Valandra tilted her head back and viewed them through the rain-sprinkled skylight. The wet-colored glass fractured the moon's perfect spherical shapes, but somehow augmented their natural beauty. She heard a sound from the antechamber, then saw a figure illuminated from behind. It was Nicholas, and he had replaced some of his garments, apparently while she dozed. "You should get some rest," she said to him, low and seductive. "You don't want to be too tired for tomorrow." He sat on the bed next to her and caressed her hand with his own. She could see her beautiful reflection in his large, dark eyes. "You have already tired me," he said, "but tomorrow will bring with it a new dawn." He leaned over to kiss her, and Valandra lost herself in the passionate moment with a handsome soldier. She heard another sound, and she broke their embrace with a start. Another figure was standing in the entrance, holding a chalice before him. "I see I'm interrupting," the person said, and Valandra recognized the voice as Kivar's. Valandra looked toward Nicholas, who seemed to take Kivar's surprise entrance in stride. "Kivar, I didn't expect you so soon," she said. "My other engagements this evening are finished," he said, doffing a wet cloak and letting it slip to the ground. "Everything went according to my plans." He sat on the edge of the bed and offered her the chalice. "Don't be alarmed, my beautiful Valandra. I knew of your affair with Nicholas and gave him my blessing to continue. Anything to make you happy. Philandra drank deeply from the cup and smiled at her two lovers. What will make me happy is for peace to come tomorrow. The truce you promised will lead toward that goal. Yes, Kivar said, and thank you for allowing us to enter the city unopposed, my exquisite Philandra. My brother won't approve, but he acts too slowly sometimes, Philandra said. She was about to say something else, but she found her thoughts were becoming unclear. Your brother is past caring what you do, loved one, Kivar said, caressing her cheek with his hand, as his wrath. Philandra was about to ask Kivar what he meant, but she wasn't able to speak. She felt weighed down, and as she looked at the two men who had been her lovers, she saw them as if from a distance. Above them, the colors of the skylight became more and more diffused, and even the ever-constant moons of Antar seemed to dim. And then the hues of skylight faded to darkness, and Philandra was no more. An eternity of darkness seemed to pass before another voice impinged on her mind. Isabel! With a great effort, Isabel lifted her head. Crouched next to her was Alex Whitman, looking just as he always had, comfortable. Isabel, you need to wake up, Alex said. Let me sleep, Isabel said, her words thick and slurred. I'm tired of running. I know, but you have to keep running, Alex said. Things are going to get worse and you must try to help. He didn't touch her, but rather hovered nearby, his words soft and gentle in her ear. Alex had always been so pleasant and plain and safe. How can he be talking about danger? Isabel struggled to marshal her energies enough to sit up, but she discovered that her limbs were twitching spasmodically as if she were being electrocuted. They need you, Isabel, he said, his face showing concern. Who does? She asked groggily. All of them, Alex responded. Your friends, your family, your husband. That was pretty wild, Kyle said as he followed Max and Michael out into the service quarter. It was clear to Kyle that Max was beside himself with worry and hoped his own zen-like calm would rub off on him. Michael, however, seemed way past the reach of any Buddhist vision of tranquility. He was obviously ready to go to war. Quickly scanning the corridor, Kyle saw that it was empty in both directions, except for some flattened cardboard boxes lying along one of the walls, next to a few scattered bags of trash and packing foam. He pointed down to their left where the corridor angled around a corner. That's the direction the girls would have come from. We've got to see if they made it, Michael said, already dashing for the corner. Kyle wondered if Max felt relieved when his friend took the lead at times like this. He was certainly glad that he wasn't the one who had to make all the decisions for the group. Max and Kyle followed immediately behind Michael, both sparing brief glances over their shoulders to look for pursuers. A moment later, the trio rounded the corner. They saw the girls along with a pair of federal agents. Isabel and Maria lay unmoving on the concrete floor, while one agent was putting handcuffs on Liz from behind. Another agent kept a powerful-looking gun trained on her. Kyle turned toward Max and Michael and saw that they were both extending their hands forward, obviously about to unleash their powers. Suddenly, the agent who held his gun on Liz turned and shouted to them, These girls are alive for now, but if you make any threatening gestures, I can't guarantee they'll stay that way. What do we do? Kyle asked, putting his hand on Max's shoulder. Suddenly, everything changed. Kyle was seeing the corridor from a different angle, and as he turned his head, he saw himself looking back at himself. Max, what do we do? Other Kyle asked, even as the very same words were leaving his own lips. Then he was in the clothing store, watching himself sweep fragments of shattered glass from his fuzzy purple sweater top. He noticed that one of his long lacquered nails had broken during the explosion. Next, he was looking down at Liz's hands as he knelt over her and fastened the handcuffs around her wrists. Heartbeat later, he was looking down his arm at the gun in his hand as he pointed it at the frightened trio of teenage boys, one of whom was him, Kyle Valenti. And then he found himself in utter darkness. He crawled forward along an unyielding surface toward a dazzling light that made him squint. The brilliance quickly resolved itself into Isabel, who lay on the service corridor's hard floor. She looked beautiful as always, yet disturbingly lifeless. A nearby movement caught his eye, and he turned to see a shape emerge from the surrounding darkness. It was Alex Whitman, who had been dead now for nearly 2 years. Alex? Kyle asked, incredulous. Alex tilted his head and looked at him strangely, almost as though he were having trouble recognizing him. Your voice sounds like Max's, Kyle. What's going on? Kyle needed to know. You need to help Isabel. Her nervous system has been disrupted, Alex explained, crouching beside the young half-alien woman. I can't help her, Kyle said. He knelt next to her and pulled her head up in his hands, then cradled her neck in one hand and pulled open an eyelid with the other. Isabel, wake up. She didn't respond. Her eyes were rolled back into their sockets, showing nothing but white. Almost instinctively, he spread his fingers, positioning one on her cheek, the other splaying out from her forehead to her ear, his thumb coming to rest near her jaw. Then Kyle's hand began to glow, faintly at first, but quickly brightening and taking on a silver blue tint. His mind was filling up with a kaleidoscopic tumble of images. A star pattern, a spaceship, a trio of moons in fragmented multiple colors, the rock formations of the desert beyond Roswell, a series of rune-like characters glowing on a glass surface, the fathomless black eyes of a gray-skinned creature leaning over him. Moments later, the visions faded away and the glow that had engulfed his hands subsided. Kyle felt exhausted. This might take time you don't have, Alex said, but you can end the suffering. You are the key. What's happening to me, Alex? Kyle had barely phrased the question before he found himself back in the hallway, standing behind Michael, his hand on Max's shoulder. Alex, what? Michael asked, looking at Kyle strangely. We've got to get the girls out of there, Max said, obviously focused on the girls and the agents who had apprehended them. But it's too far to use our powers effectively, and we'll risk them getting hurt. You three, down on the ground, the gun-toting agent yelled. Knowing more than a little about law enforcement from his father, Kyle imagined that the man was surprised they hadn't left the girls behind and made a break for it. Most criminals ran or tried to. Do what he says, Max said, his voice pitched low, clearly intended only for Kyle's and Michael's ears, but be prepared to fight back. Michael grimaced as he put his arms in the air and began to kneel. Whether it was his background as a soldier on Antar or the stubborn tough guy personality drilled into him by his abusive stepfather in a trailer park back in Roswell, Kyle knew that Michael clearly was not happy about backing down from a fight. We can take them, Max. Our shields can stop the bullets. Max was kneeling as well. We can stop the bullets from hitting us, but we can't shield Isabel or Liz or Maria. Isabel might be able to shield them, but they've done something to her. They disrupted her system, Kyle explained. They've got tasers. Behind them, they heard a commotion in the hall. Kyle realized the other agents and officers had made their way into the back of the corridor, though it seemed as an eternity had passed since he and the others had come to the spot. Kyle knew that in reality, it had probably only been a minute or two. Kyle's mind raced. What do we do? If we can wake Isabel up, she might be able to protect the other girls, or at least give Liz a chance to use her defensive powers. The scuffle of shoes and boots behind them grew louder, and Max and Kyle turned their heads to see 7 armed men coming toward them. Kyle glanced at Michael, who kept his gaze squarely on the agents who menaced the girls. Kyle closed his eyes and tried to go back to the place where he had just come from, where he had seen the unconscious Isabel and had spoken with Alex. He had no idea how he'd gotten himself there in the first place, but he knew that if he could return there, he could change the terrible future that now barreled toward them all like an out of control freight train. Concentrating hard, Kyle saw Isabel again lying in the darkness, very far away. As he moved closer, he began shouting to her, his words echoing up and down some back service corridor of his own mind. Isabel! Isabel! Wake up!
Chapter 5. New York City. Split up, Rath shouted, coughing. We'll meet up again tonight in the usual place. Unfortunately, he had already lost track of Lonnie and Ava in all the tumult, and could only hope that they'd heard him. A bedlam of shouts, curses, and weapons fire now filled the gutted warehouse, as did the smoke from the canisters that had fallen at Rath's feet. Enclosed behind an impenetrable veil of caustic vapor, Rath found that he could still move, but it felt as though he were swimming through peanut butter. Unable to draw breath or see much of anything through his burning eyes, he forced his body forward away from the din. All at once a wave of dizziness seized him, and he dropped heavily to his knees. Then he noticed that some clear air lingered near the floor. Inhaling deeply, he crawled as quickly as he could toward one of the walls. He could breathe now, but his eyes continued to water, obscuring his vision. But now he saw light ahead of him. The fire escape has to be around here, he thought, rising in a corner to feel around for a railing he remembered having seen earlier. Focusing past the exhaustion caused by the earlier battle, Rath concentrated on neutralizing the effects of the smoke canisters. Moments later, he felt only marginally better. He was still tired, and he simply wasn't the healer the late Zan the Man had been, but at least he could see a little more clearly now. Rath saw that he stood only a few yards away from a wide, cracked window, through which he could see the platform and railings of a rusty metal fire escape. Its ladder led downwards towards the street. Machine gun fire perforated the floor near his feet. He bolted towards the fire escape, diving straight for the window. Shutting his eyes tightly and throwing his arms in front of his face, he let his careening body shatter the blast. His heavy leathers protected his forearms, but his cheeks and scalp felt moist from 1,000 tiny cuts. He ignored the pain and hurried down the fire escape ladder, which quickly extended towards the pavement in response to his weight. He paused, glancing groundward for the first time since he got clear of the building. A little less than 1 story below him, 10 or 15 riot cops, decked out in body armor and gas masks, were rushing into the building for one of the street-level loading docks, which the cops apparently had just knocked down with the front end of their armored vehicle. More riot cops seemed to be coming, both from the armored car and also from around the building's corner, while he watched. One of the troopers suddenly looked up in Rath's direction, though Rath couldn't see the cop's eyes through his shiny black helmet visor. The policeman pointed at him with a nasty-looking black truncheon and barked an unintelligible command. More cops paused momentarily, and each of them looked Rath's way. Several leveled their rifles in his direction. Caught between the hammer and the anvil, Rath thought, quickly moving his muscular body back up the ladder and onto the fire escape platform. Alien-possessed derelicts were one thing. Highly trained armored cops were something else entirely. Even if Lonnie and Ava managed to dodge the freaks in there, he thought, they aren't going to have an easy time getting past these guys. As Rath headed towards the shattered window, one of the riot cops down below bellowed an order to halt. Rath ignored the command, as well as the bullet that struck the masonry near his shoulder. He dived back into the building, wondering exactly how long he had left until the oil furnace that Lonnie had sabotaged finally exploded. Moments later, the warehouse reverberated with a deafening roar as gouts of smoke and flame erupted everywhere all at once. Rath couldn't help thinking that he, Lonnie, and Ava probably had very little chance of getting out of this alive. Boom, Lonnie said, grinning at Ava through the lingering pall of tear gas. The two of them were still lying on the floor where they had thrown themselves after the cops had entered and started exchanging fire with the armed alien freaks. I hope that explosion took out the freakazoid's machinery, Ava said, coughing. I was starting to think that boiler you sabotaged was going to take all day to blow. Lonnie nodded as she rose unsteadily to her feet. Ava thought she looked as utterly exhausted as she herself felt. You worry too much, O Queen of Antar, Lonnie said, pointing towards a heap of dusty clothing that only moments before had contained a hostile, alien-possessed derelict. I just gave them their one-way ticket home. Without their machinery, they can't hang on to their host bodies. They just crumble away to dust like the skins in their husks, or those vamps on Buffy. Eva looked at the mortal remains of what had been a human being and suddenly felt ill. She realized the tear gas was only partly responsible. Too bad we couldn't have found a better way. Better them than us, Lonnie said, shrugging. Now let's get out of here. Eva coughed like a 4-pack-a-day smoker as Lonnie helped her to her feet. Great, Eva said as she recovered from her coughing fit. Now all we have to do is slip past the cops and find Rat. Freeze! Police! Fatigue, Eva hadn't noticed the riot cop until it was far too late. Should have stayed in frickin' Roswell with Max, Eva thought, meekly raising her hands. Sergeant Vince Orman had only been forced to draw his weapon in the line of duty on a few prior occasions. Today was the first time he'd been forced to take another human being's life. The unkempt young man who had leapt out at him from behind a storage locker had been young, a little more than a boy, really. Despite his riot helmet and gas mask, Orman had seen the gun in his assailant's hand and had ordered him to drop it. But the kid had simply kept on coming, a vacant, strung-out look on his face. Now he lay dead on the warehouse floor as clouds of tear gas quickly engulfed the place. Feeling a bitter upwelling of regret, Orman looked carefully at the teen's face. He thought of the kid who had tried to exit the building via the fire escape a few minutes earlier, only to be chased back inside by the squad. Though Orman had only caught a glimpse of that kid, he could tell that this wasn't him. Better keep an eye out for that one. I've seen him around on the street, and he looks like trouble. Luckily, the tear gas canister seemed to be having a profound effect on the other perps. Like the dead teen, these people carried firearms of various calibers and represented a fair cross-section of New York's street dwellers. They were dropping like flies, even as Orman and the men and the women of his SWAT team secured the building's perimeter and began methodically handcuffing the at least 24 people who were now gasping for air on the warehouse floor. Orman felt the building shudder as a sound like thunder rattled the floor beneath his boots. The hell was that? He said, turning towards a female officer named Carmody. Sounds like somebody set off a bomb, Carmody said, down in the basement. Go check it out, Orman said, suppressing a nightmare memory of Ground Zero and all the friends and colleagues he lost there. Let's hope we don't have more terrorists on our hands. I don't think it's terrorists, Sarge, Carmody said, pointing towards one of the cuffed thugs who lay on the floor near her feet. Though Orman couldn't see Carmody's face, he could hear an edge of incredulity in her voice. Orman studied the perp on the ground and saw that he was decaying into dust right before his eyes. Looking through the haze of gas that still hung in the air, the sergeant saw that the other perps were also rapidly turning to powdery ash, which scattered into the air to mix with the drifting tear gas. All that remained of them was their clothing, weapons, and the handcuffs that had been placed on them during their arrests. I don't think it's terrorists, Carmody repeated, kicking at the now vacant pile of ragged clothing at her feet. Unless we just broke up an Al-Qaeda sleeper cell from Mars, that is. Sarge, called another member of the SWAT team, a burly former bouncer named Richards who handcuffed a pair of teenage girls. With their bizarre punk hair and motley riot girl fashions, they looked like refugees from some 80s era retro dance club. Orman walked quickly towards Richards and the girls. Bring them both in for questioning, Artie. I think these ladies have a lot of explaining to do. Hidden behind a discarded pile of scrap metal, washed as a phalanx of heavily armed riot cops proceeded to cuff the fallen aliens, who proceeded to turn to dust just moments after Lonnie's carefully arranged boiler room explosion. Rath smiled. The Antarian-possessed freakazoids wouldn't be bothering them, at least for a little while. That was one problem down. Then he saw the cops leading Lonnie and Ava away in handcuffs. Both girls were clearly too exhausted to put up any real resistance, and Rath knew he couldn't muster enough power to fight off so many armed cops, not after having been worn down by the freaks. Maybe there's another way, he thought, silently emerging from the shadows. Moving stealthily, he mustered the last dregs of his powers. Rath approached one of the riot cops from behind.
Chapter 6, Cheyenne, Wyoming. Max heard Kyle's words reverberating as loudly as the thunderclap. Isabel, Isabel, wake up! He let out a groan as he turned his head, taking in everything in the space of a heartbeat. Everyone in the hallway who wasn't handcuffed or unconscious was clasping hands to ears, grimacing in pain. Noted. Kyle knelt beside him, his mouth tightly closed, though his eyes were wide with surprise at everyone else's reactions to his words. Max realized only then that Kyle had not spoken the words aloud. Everyone had heard Kyle, but he had not actually uttered Isabel's name aloud. Their equilibrium disrupted by the sudden imbalance in their inner ears, the agents of police wobbled a bit, but Max could see that they weren't quite incapacitated. Gazing down the corridor, Max saw Isabel move slightly. This saw her turn her head. She's okay, he thought, his spirits buoyed. Isabel rolled over and lifted her hand. Though she still appeared weak, she managed to send a power blast into the midsection of the agent nearest to her, tossing him upward and slamming him against the wall. His gun tumbled from his hand as he crumpled to the ground. Liz, use your powers, Max thought. In that instant, in his mind, he saw Kyle, then Liz, and he knew that she too had heard him, thanks to whatever channel had allowed Kyle to speak directly into their minds. Down the hall, Liz gritted her teeth and kicked out toward the second agent. Her foot collided with his leg. It would have been an ineffectual enough blow under normal circumstances, but Max could see from the glow that suffused her that she had charged herself with electrical energy. It was yet another manifestation of her still developing powers. The agent went down as if he himself had been tasered, but Max barely noticed. Moving as one, he and Michael rolled over and extended their hands. A barrier, not a blast, Max yelled, and in his mind he released energy down from his brain, through his heart, into his arm, and out through his fingers. A few feet behind, between the teams and the second group of pursuers, the air shimmered with a slight rainbow effect. Max, Michael, and Kyle got to their feet, and as they did so, the agents charged toward them. And just as quickly, the men bounced off the barely visible energy barrier that Max and Michael had just erected. Get Maria and Liz out of here, Max yelled, keeping most of his attention focused on the barrier-blocked agents, even as he looked towards the girls. As Kyle ran toward the girls, Max and Michael began stepping backward. As they did so, the barrier moved backward with them, keeping the agents at bay. Max saw that Liz and Isabel were both standing now and watched as Liz turned around so that Isabel stood behind her. Isabel touched the handcuffs that bound Liz's wrist, and they clicked open and clattered to the floor. Kyle squatted and picked up Maria. She groaned in his arms but didn't regain consciousness. Come on, Kyle said to Liz, looking off down the hallway toward an exit sign and the stairwell located just beneath it. But Max, the pod squad is going to have to defend themselves, Liz. They're up for it, Kyle said. Max turned slightly as he backed up and was glad to see that Liz and Kyle were leaving. He called back to Isabel, get their weapons and IDs. Moments later, he and Michael were stepping over the two unconscious agents who had nearly captured the girls. Their other pursuers were still hammering forward, trying to batter the force field down with nothing more than brute strength. Isabel, we're going to need one major burst of power here, Max said. They're just going to follow us out to the exit otherwise. She steeled her gaze at him, and he saw there was a bit of blood on her forehead and coming from her nose. Where do we aim it? Max judged that they were now maybe 10 feet past the fallen agents, and perhaps another 50 from the exit that Kyle, Liz, and Maria were taking. Max crouched. At the floor, he said. Max and Isabel placed their hands on the floor between them and the agents, focusing their powers just underneath the force field that Michael was now maintaining single-handedly. With a groan that sounded not unlike a Hollywood sound effect, the floor imploded downward, cracking the plaster and cinder block walls that bounded the corridor, and sending a huge cloud of gray dust everywhere that wasn't blocked by Michael's force field. The agents on the other side of the now collapsed floor cursed, pinwheeling their arms to avoid falling onto the lower level. Max smiled grimly when he saw that their gyrations couldn't prevent most of them from tumbling away into the dust cloud. He knew they'd be hurt by the fall, but they would survive. Nice one, Michael exclaimed as he allowed the force field to collapse, then turned to follow Max and Isabel. The three of them ran together toward the exit door. Max was pleased to see that the stairway opened onto the mall's parking garage. Even more luckily, they were on the same level where they parked the van. Which way to the van? Michael asked. Kyle and Liz were already out of sight. That way, Isabel said, pointing. I remember passing that blue Jaguar on our way in. As they ran, they heard a revving engine and the echoing squeal of tires. The VW microbus they had gotten from Jesse back in Roswell turned the corner moments later with Kyle behind the wheel. With a screech of the brakes, the van stopped near them. Michael flung open the side door and jumped in, followed by Isabel. Max took one last look toward the exit before he hopped into the van and was dismayed to see that at least one agent had apparently jumped the gap in the demolished floor. One agent with a cell phone. This wasn't over yet. Roswell, New Mexico. Roswell Sheriff's Deputy Jim Valenti was eating a pastrami sandwich at his desk, taking a late lunch. Sheriff Hanson regularly rotated his deputies, and today was Valenti's day to work in the office. As was typical, not much was happening. Dina Hackenberry had called in a few minutes ago to run some plates on a speeding car, and Glenn Carver had reported some teens motocrossing on Mesoleco Indian Reservation property. With a quick glance around the office, Valenti tapped the trackball mouse on his desk, waking up the computer screen. Definitely using a menu, he scrolled down to a folder called Games. He highlighted the Mahjong game, Shanghai, and double-clicked. Starting the program, in the layout menu, he chose Boar, and a black field quickly began to fill with colorful tiles. Valenti placed his cursor over the lower left corner where nothing was visible and clicked. Immediately, a pop-up window appeared reporting an error alert of 47 and displaying an empty dialog box. He typed his password, one of us, and it launched a specially built email application that began searching for incoming communications. 3 months ago, he had pulled over Jerry Ailston for weaving on the road. Ailston had consented to a search of his vehicle, and the deputy had found a small bag of marijuana. Not enough for a felony, but certainly a misdemeanor. But it was the laptop in the back of the car that especially had caught Valenti's attention, as well as the bumper stickers that were, as he later found out, the obscure sayings of computer geeks. Ailston had been a friend of Alex Whitman's in high school, and Valenti knew he was more of a maladjusted geek than a drug dealer or a threat to the Roswellian way of life. Kyle had even mentioned once or twice what a genius Ailston was with computers. After appropriately scaring Ailston and bringing out a set of handcuffs, Valenti stared at him closely. "I'll tell you what, Jerry, seeing as how I don't think you're going to be driving under influence again anytime soon, I'm going to let this one slide. If you do me a favor, a big favor." Ailston shifted nervously, his reddened eyes glancing side to side like a pair of trapped animals. "What kind of a favor?" "I need some computer help, some top secret help." The kid grinned, seeming to relax. "Oh, sure. I just thought I meant, sure, I'll do any computer work you want." True to his word, Ailston had done so. Valenti knew he was being watched by the Fed, so any contact he had with the cyber talented team was carried out very surreptitiously. Jerry had shown him some extremely neat computer tricks and had built to the deputy's exacting specifications some customized applications for internet access, text programs, and HTML coding. These applications enabled him to use the computers at work without anyone's knowledge. Valenti had the kid describe each step along the way and even learned how to modify the programs himself. Ailston had even, on Valenti's recommendation, been allowed to update the webpage for the Roswell Sheriff's Department. Nobody knew that Valenti's own page of the site was one portal, nor that the Boar configuration to Shanghai was another portal. Valenti had others and only used the incoming portals for a week at a time. He knew the special unit, or whatever it was called, was keeping tabs on him along with Evan's family, the Parkers, and Amy DeLuca. He wasn't certain that the computers at work were bugged, but he tried to be as careful as he could be regardless. Now the computer beeped at him and displayed 3 text email files. He decrypted them, sent them to the printer, then tapped a couple of keys that re-encrypted the text messages. Anyone trying to recover them now without the encryption key would end up crashing the program for good. As Valenti reached for the 3 printed pages, he chuckled to himself. I've been worried all this time about whether Kyle and I would develop alien powers the way Liz did after Max healed her. Maybe all this computer expertise is my new power. He smiled as he looked at the 3 printouts. Each was an email message from Kyle, Maria, and Liz. A quick read told him that they were all okay. Good. Their parents will be happy to hear that. Now he would just have to wait until an appropriate time to start the delivery route. Dinner at the crash down with an extra special tip might just be the ticker tonight. He slipped the papers into a pile of his other paperwork, then grabbed his sandwich for another bite. Kyle's all right, he thought, grinning again. Cheyenne, Wyoming. Liz watched Kyle spin the wheel, making the van lurch to the side and screech down a curving ramp. She attempted to keep her balance in the back, but she fell against the sidewall, the still unconscious Maria moving with her. Ow! Liz exclaimed as she tried to steady herself. Everyone else who was conscious grabbed hold of whatever they could to stay steady. Sorry about that, Kyle yelled back, but if we don't get out of here soon, we probably never will. The last agent I just saw had a cell phone, Max said, pulling the back window blind aside so he could look out. Keep an eye out in case we pick up a tail. Got it, Isabel said, shifting in the front passenger seat. Michael looked toward Liz and Maria. Liz could see that Michael's attention was torn between his urge to stand and fight and his needs to get the girl he loved to safety. I think she'll be fine, Liz said, smoothing Maria's hair away from her closed eyes. Her pulse is strong and she's grown a few times. Maybe she'll be coming around soon. Good, Michael said. He looked vulnerable for a moment, a side that most of them rarely ever saw. Then, setting his jaw with grim determination, he moved to the back of the van where he crouched beside Max. Hold on, everybody, Kyle yelled. Moments later, the van turned sharply again, tires screaming. They're blocking the exit, Isabel said, pointing straight ahead. Liz could only wonder what obstacle fate had dropped into their path this time. We got a car on our tail, too, Max said. Ever see that Blues Brothers movie? Kyle asked as the van continued toward the waiting cars. Maybe I should take a detour through the mall. Liz scowled. Focus, Zen Master, she said. This is going to be tight, Kyle said, ignoring the rapper man. Grabbing one of the van's walls, Liz moved up onto her knees just in time to see through the windshield they were facing certain doom. A pair of police squad cars was parked nose to nose in the driveway of the mall lot, but there was an escape route. Kyle took it. Veering to the side, the van smashed through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of a store display at the corner of the mall. Mannequins dressed in mall couture were knocked aside like bowling pins. The right side wheels of the van ran up onto the raised floor, and for a fleeting second, Liz was terrified that the vehicle would flip over. The moment was brief, and before the glass and mannequins had hit the ground behind them, the van had landed on the sidewalk in the street. Revving the engine, Kyle began speeding down the street directly toward an intersection. Liz saw Kyle's grin reflected at her in the rearview mirror. We're on a mission from God, he said, quoting the Blues Brothers. Before Liz could reach forward and slap him on the back of the head, he added, Four-way light coming up. Which way? Liz turned to see Max cursing under his breath. He was still looking through the back window shade. We've got at least one car tailing us, and they're going to call reinforcements. Take whatever way will get us to hiding. That's helpful, Kyle muttered, and slammed the pedal to the floor. Liz nearly fell over from the acceleration. The van came to a red light, but Kyle barely slowed before merging into the somewhat dense traffic heading to the right. Liz heard angry honks and brakes squealing and realized that no matter how deftly Kyle had moved the van, the lives of innocent bystanders were at risk. Sighing heavily, she closed her eyes. Why won't they just leave us alone? She knew that the answer could be summed up in a single word: fear. She had felt that fear, as had Maria and Kyle and Alex and Sheriff Lincoln. Sure, their friends had grown to understand that the half aliens who lived among them meant no harm. Most of the time, they didn't even want to be aliens. But in the beginning, she too had experienced that very same fear. So how could she blame others now for reacting in the same way? They're still on us, Max said, looking out the back window. 8 cars back and gaining. Just then, Liz could hear the rising wail of a siren. Liz decided to pay more attention to what was ahead than what lay behind. Looking forward, she watched as Isabel scanned through the scratched windshield, then pointed out to Kyle's left. Up there, Isabel said, if you can get in front of that semi, you can use it to block them and make a turn. Honking the horn, Kyle accelerated the van. Liz could see that cars were pulling to the side to let them pass, and then she saw the truck Isabel was talking about. Moments later, Kyle swerved in front of the truck. In the back, Michael jumped as the truck blew his air horn, its brakes squealing. Through the windows, Liz could see its front grille looming behind them, much too close for comfort. Hang on, Kyle said again, swerving the van. Liz saw a yellow light flash by as he turned, apparently racing through another intersection. The minibus shuddered, tires scratching rubber across the asphalt, but kept its balance and much of its forward momentum. Then Liz heard an impact, followed by the unmistakable grinding sound of metal on metal. For a moment, she wondered if something had blown up in the van's engine, like the time they'd all been stranded in the little town of Stonewall. Liz turned to see both Michael and Max glued to the windows. What happened? She asked, her voice more shrill than she wanted it to be. We just lost our pursuer, Max said, literally. They hit an SUV. Ouch, Kyle said. Let that be a lesson to both alien hunters and gas guzzlers. Anyone else following us? Isabel asked. No, but we still have to get to safety. Find us a place to hide, Kyle, Max said, his voice firm and in control. He wasn't just requesting it, he was commanding it. Despite his protestations to the contrary, Liz knew that at times like these, his leadership instinct simply took over. She didn't mind. It felt right. She turned back toward the front of the van. You got it, Max, Kyle said, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. Liz heard a groan behind her and turned to see Maria groggily waking up. Michael moved swiftly over to her side. What happened? She asked weakly. Did I just miss the really exciting part? Perhaps ironically, Kyle found refuge for the microbus behind an abandoned church. The driveway was blocked by a fence, but it was easily unlocked with a flick of Isabel's hand. Because of his automotive expertise, Kyle took the lead in all matters related to the care and feeding of the van. The first order of business was disguising it, while Max and Michael changed the color of the paint, their slightly glowing palms wiping the vehicle's light green away in favor of a dull red. Isabel used her powers to mend the nicks and dents in the windshield and body of the van. It wasn't the first time they had recolored their transportation, but it was the most extensive body repair they'd ever had to do. Looking briefly at the engine, Kyle was relieved to discover that nothing essential had been broken during the chase. So far, he thought. Michael knew how tired he was and imagined that Max and Isabel were probably feeling every bit as drained as he was. He knew that using their powers as much as they had today generally required a good 8-hour sleep for complete recharge. But he also knew that they might not have that much time. We have to disguise ourselves and get out of Dodge, he thought. They hadn't fully discussed what had just happened or its ramifications, but this had been far too close a call. Michael was getting really tired of running from the government, from other aliens, from whoever happened to be hunting them or haunting them from week to week. More and more, he wondered if his instincts and his past as Wrath, leader of the Antarian military forces, might not be catching up with him. How much longer am I going to be able to hold back? When do all of us finally decide to fight back? While Kyle checked the engine and the rest of the van for any other damage, Liz was taking care of Maria, who sat looking weathered in the front passenger seat. Michael could tell that the taser had really knocked her for a loop, and he wondered if the setting might not have been higher than normal. It seemed to have done quite a number on Isabel as well, at least in the mall. Walking the length of the van, Michael squatted near the bumper beside Max. "What do you want the plates to say, Maxwell?" he asked. Max looked over at the church, then back again. "Only 7 letters. CATHLIC. If they think we're good Christians, maybe they won't take any special notice of our van." He thought for a moment, then added, "and change the state to California." Michael smiled and moved his hand over the form in the middle of the rear plate. With a few small pops and pings, the lettering reshaped itself into the requested words. He also changed the registration tags month and year and stood and walked back around to the van's front to change the other plate. On the way, he leaned through the passenger side window. "Hey," he said simply to Maria. Liz gave her friend a water bottle, then exited through the van's other side and wandered away. The radio chattered in the background. "Hi, Space Boy," Maria said, managing a weak smile. "How are you feeling?" He reached forward and stroked her arm. "Like hell. I keep shivering, but I'm not cold, and I've got this twitch in my eye. And I think that FBI zap gun gave me split ends." She offered a wobbly smile, then tears welled up in her eyes. She leaned forward, and Michael enfolded her in his arms. "It's okay," he said softly, his hand stroking her neck and back. "You'll feel better soon, and Isabel can fix your hair. Or I can if you really want, but that might be scarier than dealing with the split ends." Michael was gratified to hear Maria's light laughter, which was muffled by his shoulder. She didn't pull away, and moments later, he realized she was crying again. He held her tighter, willing her to feel his love and his resolve that everything really was going to be all right. After a minute or so had passed, Maria let go and sat straighter in the seat. She wiped under her eyes with the back of her hand and sniffled a bit. "I'm sorry. It must be the jolt of juice that made me so emotional." Michael restrained himself from saying what he thought. "You're always emotional." Instead, he just stroked her arm with his hand. When he sensed she was steady enough, he said, "I need to go finish with the license plate. You going to be okay?" She nodded, and he moved to the front of the VW where Isabel was finished with dent repairs, and Kyle was fiddling with the bent windshield wipers. As Michael crouched in front of the license plate, he said, "Nice driving job, Valenti." Kyle looked down at him, a frustrated look on his face. "Hey, if you think you could have done better." His face changed as Michael looked at him with sincerity. "Oh, thanks." Michael began reshaping the license letters. "I couldn't have done better," he said. "At least not in this vehicle. Give me a bike, and I could have escaped with a few less bruises and scrapes, but you got all of us out of the frying pan." He didn't look up, but he knew Kyle was probably gaping at him because of this uncharacteristic compliment. Michael knew he was generally the most contrary of the 6 of them. But sometimes it just seemed right to go against the grain and be a nice guy. Besides, Kyle had done a good job. "Everybody, get over here." It was Liz's voice, and she sounded alarmed. Michael, Kyle, Isabel, and Max converged at the side of the van within seconds. Maria was leaning into the vehicle, her hand on the radio's volume knob. She was listening intently. "What is it?" Max asked. "It's not good news," Maria said gravely.